challenge is that Issei people are getting older, right? And they are unable to be cared for in the homes of families. And the only place that they can really go is like a nursing home, right? For elderly people. However, these nursing homes, when they are living there, what kind of food are they serving? Or what kind of activities are they doing? Right? They're not really suited for someone who has come from Japan. So she gave the example of they cannot eat any rice or miso soup, or they can't do any kind of whatever Japanese activities, origami, ikebana, or anything like that, right? So at this time, a group of Japanese Americans, mostly Niseis, Hamsansei, decided we need to create something that addresses the needs of the Issei community, right? So that's where they create Nikkei Concerns, and then Nikkei Manor, and Seattle K-Road. Nikkei Manor is for people who can kind of live on their own, but still require some kind of support. Seattle K-Row is for people who are a little bit more ill and advanced. They need more round-the-clock care. But both of these facilities are targeting the Nikkei community, right? Now, in this time, there are Issei people, right? They're still living, but they're older. Now, you flash forward to the 2000s, right? And this is what they were talking about yesterday. Now in the 2000s, there are very few Isseis left. Right? The people that are older are Niseis, many of whom have married with people of other cultural backgrounds. Right? So the whole nature of the Nikkei community is very different than what it was 30 years ago. Right? So if they continue to operate in this way, then they're no longer really innovative, right? I mean, they're not kind of on that edge and doing anything different. This was very socially innovative at the time, right? Looked at a challenge, created an opportunity, and created this program to address the needs. Over here in the 2000s, though, now the needs have changed. And like the COO was saying yesterday, you have very few pure Japanese, right? Many, many people have mixed backgrounds. So now the question for Nikkei Concerns, Nikkei Manor, Seattle K-Row is, how are they going to innovate? Right? What are they going to do to address those needs? If they continue just to serve Japanese food and doing Japanese cultural events, and other people at this place are coming from Cambodia or Vietnam or Philippines, now it's just like it was back here where they didn't feel connected to these other nursing homes, right? So it's a really interesting question because there are all kinds of opportunities to create something more multicultural or pluralistic, right, with what they're doing here. So this is really the challenge for innovation in what they're doing, which Mickey has so wisely pointed out, is that it's changing, and it's changing very quickly over time. So the lesson to be learned here for you guys is that what may be innovative now is not going to be innovative in the future for you. That's always going to change, right? And if you stick with your idea of what was innovative in the past, it's probably going to get stale very quickly. And so you remember, I guess it was yesterday, when I was talking to you about some of these principles of social innovation, right? And the importance of being dynamic and flexible. This is an example of that, right? I have this great idea now, but time is moving forward, and the world is changing all around that. So I have to be able to be adaptive in that same way, right? So again, I mean, what you're learning now, taking a step back, this is why iLeap's programs look like they do, in that the kind of learning that we want you to do is what we call adaptive versus technical. know what the difference between those two might be? You want to guess? Adaptive versus technical. It's a hard question I'm asking.
Can I take a stab at
Yeah,
it?
go for it.
For example, I'm actually tutoring a little girl right now in Japanese, and I started off with more of the technical approach where I would list out words and she would memorize, and it wasn't really working for her. And so I changed it where she liked to draw, for example, and so I would give her a word and I'd say, don't just memorize it, draw a picture of what the word means, for example. So I would kind of help her learn in a way that was best for her instead of just following the blueprint.
Very good. That's a great example. So one way of kind of boiling this down is technical learning tends to be more fact-based, and this is more process-based. Okay, so in Kylie's example, technical would be learn these vocabulary words, more kind of rote memorization type thing. Whereas a more process or adaptive approach is one that is thinking about how you learn, right? And why this is so important is because the facts always change. They are always changing. What you know now to be true, tomorrow could be false. So by focusing on a technical approach, what we know now address the needs of Issei very soon into the future becomes irrelevant because the problems have changed, right? Whereas an adaptive approach, one that is more process-based, focuses on how you learn, how you think about these problems. That kind of an approach can be applied in any of these things, right? How you think about the challenge in the 1970s, identifying problems, identifying opportunities, developing collaborations and all that. That process is going to be just as appropriate here, right? You can apply that to the shifting tide of whatever's happening. So that's why we really focus on this adaptive approach. It's really fundamental toward the approach of creating innovation, right? So that's why you won't find me saying to you, you must know A, B, C in order to be innovative, right? Because A, B, C today, tomorrow will be D, E, F, and then your ABC will no longer have any worth, yeah? So of course what happens in most university settings, right? You get this more than this. So if you're like me, the things that you learned in university where you were tested and you had to memorize things and all that, you don't really remember. But it's how you learn things that often the things that stick, right? Because those are the skills that you take forward. The next time something happens, you're able to kind of understand it in a different way. Yeah. So adaptive versus technical. So that's kind of a sidebar thing. Let's see, a couple more about Keiroho. So Atsunori, you have to write about this, right? Aren't you writing about this in the blog?
Yeah, he was taking notes really hard, interviewing people.
He asked me last night how long it should be. I have a feeling your first post was like this long. Maybe you're writing a long story. So what were you thinking about when you were?
I think Seattle Keido need many volunteers for continuing management. Now, but volunteers coming is decreasing and aging. But Japanese elder facility can't arrange as well as Seattle Keido home. That is a problem of aging society and elder society of developed country.
like 10,000 Villages. It's like a number of these other social businesses or nonprofits that you see, that they require volunteer labor in order to exist. Right? If they did not have volunteers, they would have a very difficult time surviving. Right? Probably, Miko, when you go travel, many of these smaller NGOs that you visit,
Yeah.
no one is getting paid, right?
Mm.
Or maybe one person, just a little bit, right?
I know.
But everyone is working so hard. Right?
Yeah.
So basically, they're all volunteering.
Yes.
And this is kind of like a hidden thing in the economy, right? We don't really track this. When you talk about gross national product or economic growth or anything like that, it doesn't take into account people's volunteer hours, right? We don't think of that as being productive in the economic sense, when in fact it's incredibly important, right? Without that, we couldn't have, so for example, if we were to say to NPOs, you cannot have volunteer labor, you must pay those people at least $10 an hour. That would probably put out of business a good number of NPOs because they couldn't afford it, because they rely on that volunteer work so much. So this is an important thing because there is a kind of like a pool of volunteers, right? And all of the different NGOs are competing over volunteers, right? And so we don't really look at this as being an important part of social innovation, right? So are you going to create a business model that's based on volunteer labor, right? And if you are, how is that going to be sustainable? You know, how are people eventually going to get paid? Yeah, because we all want to think we're doing such good things out of the goodness of our heart, but at the same time, we all have needs that need to be paid for. Right? So in the case of Seattle Keiro Home, as Atsunori pointed out, the people here, when this started, it was very exciting, right? Issei were getting older, Nisei families got very excited, Sansei children and grandchildren got very excited too, right? More people. Now what's happening? Issei people are dying. Now it's the Niseis